The fact
Gotcha.
of the fact, why should
Anything
that
else?
matter? There's a lot of things to keep track of. Like that 14,000 figure of deaths you cited, I don't even know where that comes from. It's like a misciting of like the UNHCR report. That's not true that 14,000 civilians have been killed. The fact that Russia didn't invade, that's not true. Spetsnaz and other special infantry were seen literally going when Russia called that snap 150,000 troops that they collected on the eastern border for a distraction on February 22nd. That's not true. The idea that Russia would see what happened in Yugoslavia and Libya, that's not Russia. Why would NATO attacking those countries have anything to do with NATO attacking Russia?
I understand the Ukrainian point of view too. I mean, they suffered tremendously through Holodomor and then occupations by both the Soviet Union and the Nazis.
Ha 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 ha.
And they saw a lot of their wealth transferred to ethnic Russians. They saw a lot of corruption.
You're going to have countries like Finland that has air supremacy over Russia now because Russia doesn't have anything in the arsenal that can stand up to an F-35. That's why I think Russia did not.
Can carry nukes as well.
Yeah, well, so pretty much a B-52 can carry nukes. So this is kind of a misnomer. A B-1 can carry nukes, an F-117 can carry nukes, a B-2 can carry nukes, an F-16 can carry nukes, an F-15 can carry nukes, an F-18 can carry nukes. The thing is, it's the A modification. Mm-hmm. They can all carry nukes. Nukes are, it just means it's a bomb that has a warhead with uranium, plutonium, and tritium.
What's your stance on the Russian-Ukraine conflict?
Wow.
Yeah, I guess in the broadest of senses, from 1991, Ukraine has been a country that was recognized by everybody around the world. Fast forwarding through a lot of stuff, in 2014, there was an ousting of a leader. Some people call it a revolution. I think some people incorrectly call it a coup. In response to that ousting, Russia invades Crimea, and Russia begins to fund and back separatist movements. Ukraine refers to them as terrorists in the east, in the Donbass. And then from 2014 on to 2023, we've got basically military conflict that's been escalating in 2022. The invasion happened, everything is subsumed under that actual invasion, and here we are today. I think that the broadest of senses, well, I'm sure we'll get into the details of all of this. I don't think that the initial Russian invasion into Crimea was at all justified. I don't think that
in 2014.
In 2014. Yep. I don't think that there's any evidence of any CIA coup or any sort of
crazy
backing from the West showing that Euromaidan was artificially inflated by Western forces. I don't think there was any evidence that there was an actual coup d'etat. I don't think that the backing of separatist leaders in the East is good for anybody. It's not good for Ukraine. It's not good for the people that live there. It only benefits Russia if they can manage to peel away those separatist states and incorporate them into some kind of Russian federation. And I think that Russia is in the moral wrong basically from start to finish with this entire conflict.
So you don't think they had any real basis for invasion, whether it was 2014 or now?
Absolutely not.
What about, and just playing devil's advocate, and I'll turn it to Ryan here in a second. What about the fact that they were planning to invade the Donbass region in March?
Who's planning to invade?
The Ukrainians.
It's their territory. What do you mean invade?
Well, it's ethnic Russians that dominate that area.
It doesn't matter. They're Ukrainian citizens.
Yeah, I mean, there's ethnic Mexicans that live in San Antonio, but if Mexico tries to invade, we would still stop them. It doesn't give them the right to invade just because people speak the same language.
You can't invade your own territory. It's their territory.
In fact, let's take this analogy further. The majority of people who live
kill 14,000 people in the Donbass.
Right, but the same. My point is, you don't have the right to do it just because those people. By the way, if Russia is giving them weapons and money to do so, then they fight back. Then the narrative becomes, look at what Ukraine is doing. They're killing all these people in Donbass. Well, then stop giving them weapons. That's the difference. If again, I'm going to use this example because a lot of people from this country, if Mexico started funding terrorists that live in San Antonio, Harlingen, and fucking Brownsville, the United States would do something to stop it. And then the news media would be like, do you see the Americans killing these Mexicans inside? No, at some point, if you attack, they get to attack back. And his argument is going to be sovereignty. My argument is even if there was a coup, the problem is they invaded Ukraine. They invaded Crimea. Invading Crimea doesn't make the populace more likely to be pro-Russian. It makes them less likely to be pro-Russian. Secondly, their parliament had almost unanimously agreed to trade agreements with the West. And their president, on the last second, switched sides and said, no, we're not going to take these trade agreements. And then that's where all these people started rioting. My point is, even if there was a coup, which he's going to say there's no evidence, but that's how the CIA works. They don't leave evidence. I'm still saying there's enough reason for the people in Ukraine to not want to be a part of Russia after you understand what I'm saying? You bite my leg. Maybe I don't want to be friends with you anymore. You take Crimea. Maybe we don't want to be with Russia anymore. So his thing is, there's no evidence that there was a coup. My thing is, even if there was a coup, there was enough reason for the people in Ukraine to not want to join with Russia. That's my point.
Ryan, what's your stance and response to that?
Crimea was not annexed. That was a secession movement, and it's mostly ethnic Russians that live there anyway. Russia's not going to lose their base on the Black Sea, so they have every reason to back it. But invaded how? There wasn't a military invasion of Crimea. Crimea left Ukraine. And Ukraine did attack the Donbass. and probably Russia did back separatists. But I think you have to go back before that. This was avoidable. And Zelensky's talking about the Belarus memorandum. I'm so tired. Okay, flew here from Asia. Memorandum, which is about how they had to get rid of their nuclear weapons because they couldn't afford to maintain them, and it was kind of political blackmail to say, send us money, or we're going to reduce these weapons.
No
but you
way.
have to pay us to maintain them.
Wow.
Everyone agreed to get rid of nukes in that. Zelensky brings it up again. And that's a flex showing the Russians don't want a nuclear armed Ukraine on their border. They know they're trained to NATO standards, and they don't want NATO expansion. They've seen what happened in Libya. They've seen what happened in Yugoslavia. And so I understand the Russians' fear about
Oh my
this.
God.
When they finally have a pro-Russian leader in charge that was going to accept the economic agreements that were favorable to the Russian state. You have to see they were walking into this 15 billion euros in debt. Ukraine's had corrupt governments from the 90s to now, one oligarch after another. So
That's
there's a lot of
crazy,
people
Chad.
within the state that they were in favor of some sort of economic partner, either
Gotcha.
the
Anything
Americans
else?
in the EU or the Russians. And obviously it's in U.S.'s interest for it to not be with the Russians. And Nuland and the rest of them were, when there was violence that both sides could take advantage of. So you had protests against the election results, and then you had counter protests. And the counter protesters were walled up in Odessa. I think 48 people burned alive.
Mhm.
And that's insane. And when you look at Maidan, it's very similar to Syria with snipers shooting police and things.
Ha
And
ha
so,
ha ha.
Many people believe, there's foreign-backed separatists.
So would you? I guess so. You disagree with Destiny because he said
Justified to
They are
invade.
justified.
That's different than what he's saying. He's saying,
yeah, no, he's saying that. I mean, we had all these issues.
there
I'm
is a-
explaining
there- I
why
think-
they would say they did it.
Hold on. I think Destiny would understand there's a reason for them to invade. The question is, do they have the right to invade? And going back to what you're saying
hold
before,
on, wait, real quick, because I would want to fight on almost every single one of those.
Okay. Can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah, go for
the
it.
president who went and took that friendly Russian
No
deal,
way.
he agreed
Wow.
previously to
We're
not
gonna,
take
we're
that
gonna have
Russian
a
deal.
debate, and I don't have the internet. I don't think anyone else
Oh, I'm
should.
sorry. I just took notes. I apologize.
I was gonna say,
Okay, I can stop doing it. Anyway,
like, just get rid of phones.
Yeah,
the point is
Wait, hold on, wait. The facts are the facts. Why should that matter? There's a lot of things to keep track of. Like that 14,000 figure of deaths you cited. I don't even know where that comes from. It's like a misciting of like the UNHCR report. That's not true. That 14,000 civilians have been killed. The fact that Russia didn't invade, that's not true. Spetsnaz and other special infantry were
Oh my
seen
God.
literally going when Russia called that snap 150,000 troops that they collected on the eastern border for a distraction on February 22nd. That's not true. The idea that Russia would see what happened in Yugoslavia and Libya, that's not Russia. Why would NATO attacking those countries have anything to do with NATO attacking Russia? There's
February
already-
22nd is not what I was talking about with Crimea.
They're not what?
February
You were-
22nd is the hot war from last year.
In 2014, I'm talking
So
2014.
that's
Oh,
crazy,
that was the
Chad.
same date,
Sorry.
actually.
On,
Yeah,
on
sorry.
2014,
I
there was
got
a
you.
Russian invasion. There were Russian troops that went
Gotcha.
into through
Anything
Sevastopol
else?
that were dropped off. There were Spetsnaz, there were special forces, the Little Green Men, the election that they held afterwards, the locking of the checkpoints to the north. Like there, you agreed.
You
like
don't
even
agree
Putin
that
doesn't
you
deny
think that
that.
election was just a farce, rigged?
I don't know if the election was a farce, but I do know that the election was held. There were reports of intimidations on the ground by the Little Green Men, and that there was a report that I think 97% of those people ended up supporting separating and joining Russia, and that election wasn't allowing any independent observers whatsoever. Are you asking me if it was rigged? I don't know. Do I trust it? Absolutely not.
The other issue is the president in 2014, he passed anti-protest laws. And
Ha, ha, ha.
right before he doesn't take those favorable trade relations with EU, he switches his position. So when you're saying, like, my point is, he wasn't the whole time he was pro-Russia. Right before, everyone was surprised when he went ahead and voted for the pro-Russian package. And that's the reason why it makes me even less think, you're saying maybe he's corrupt. That doesn't fit with the CIA plot. The point is, there's that many people protesting. Their parliament is almost entirely in agreement with joining with EU, and They've already had part of their country taken away. You're saying that they separated. That's fine.
No way.
But if I'm a Ukrainian, I still don't
Wow.
like the fact that Crimea is part of Russia. It doesn't make me want to vote for Russia. It doesn't make me want to join with Russia. That's the issue that I have. What I'm saying is, he's saying there was no CIA plot. I'm saying if there was a CIA plot, I don't think it makes any fucking difference. I think it would be the same thing either way. I think they're in a situation where you've lost part of your country, and the parliament has voted to join with favorable trade agreements with the EU, and then all of a sudden your president one day decides to not do it, and then there's a huge
my
riot,
God.
and the president has to leave the country. And where does he go? Where does he go when he leaves the country? Everybody? He goes to Russia. That's where he escapes to. So that's my issue, right? I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. Go ahead.
Ryan, you have anything back to that?
Yeah, as far as the anti-Russian sentiment started long before Crimea. They heroicized Stefan Bandera and others, which was reversed in
That's crazy, chat.
2010. But you have to see how the Russians are looking at that when they are
Gotcha. Anything else?
heroicizing Nazis from the past and then banning the Russian language and taking steps.
You're talking about Ukraine, they're banning the Russia. Okay, because you said the Russian, sorry.
Well, yeah, this war has really disturbed me in the sense of how anti-Russia has gotten, where anything Russian, even the Paralympics, athletes, musicians, are being banned because they're Russian, which I think that's reminds me of after September 11th, there was a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment or even just Arab. And so actually worse than that, even if you're a Sikh from India or something, you looked Arab,
Yeah.
There was a lot of ignorance going around.
Doesn't that remind you of Germany when everything was being banned? Anything German was being banned?
Well, yeah, it's similar. But, you would think this isn't this is 2022, 2023.
Yeah.
To ban all things Russian, to have so much hate, so much of a lopsided media. And this is before Elon. So Twitter was just hardcore left. All the social media were coming out now with all these different Twitter files.
No way.
Information
Wow.
on how many spooks were all over all these sites and why people are getting censored. So I don't feel like we're getting the best of information.
But there's some stuff we do know. Like, for instance, 2 months before the invasion, Vladimir Putin said there was not going to be an invasion. And from a statecraft or from a military standpoint, that was a good move. But from a diplomacy standpoint, after the war, do I ever want to sign a treaty with Russia? If they're willing to lie about an invasion like that,
Oh my God.
do you see the problem?
Well, they saw
what I'm
it.
saying is some of it, they're bringing it on themselves.
It's
Go ahead.
George C. Marshall Strategic Studies Institute. Almost half of Zelensky's cabinet's coming from that. Seeing a lot of people around him. Ihor Kolomoisky sends him $41 million. There's a lot of corruption in Ukraine. And so it's almost a mafia state, has been since
That's
the
crazy,
90s.
chat.
So Russia's looking at that as these people are easily bought and paid for. And
Gotcha.
they were
Anything else?
afraid of having Western weapons and military troops on their border.
We can agree on that. Yeah. And that, because that's what happened in Finland.
Just
We
to
can
stay
talk about that too.
focused real quick. Do you have anything to refute what Destiny was saying? Because he had disagreed with some of your points. From
Well, and I also add, if you want to refute things, the Russian language was never banned. That's completely not true. Stepan Bandera it's weird that we selectively bring up like neo-Nazis on both sides or on the Ukrainian side, when I think you could find like neo-Nazi ties to the other side as well. Pavel Gubereva, I can't pronounce these fucking names, but this is the guy that called himself like the first leader of the Donbas People's Militia. Like that guy explicitly came from a neo-Nazi group. It was founded by Alexander Barkashov, who also came from a far-right nationalist group. Like the idea that neo-Nazis only exist in Ukraine, when Pew Research polling data shows that Ukraine is one of the most welcoming countries in the entire world for Jewish people, when they've had like 2 Jewish heads of state, the only other country in the world besides Israel to do so. I don't think that like finger waving over potential neo-Nazism in Ukraine that also just happens to align with Russia's primary propaganda vehicle, which is that they're fighting Nazis. That's too convenient, and there's too little evidence to actually support that.
I just want to
Hold on.
go ahead. Sorry.
No
I
way.
don't
You have
think the
anything about
Nazis
that?
in Ukraine
Wow.
are the like anti-Semitic Third Reich, like a lot of people paint them out to be. They have the same symbols. There's some swastikas and things, but the Bandera movement and the Nazi movement that they heroicize and build statues of these people wasn't about. It's the same. It's not the same as Hitler putting people in camps. It was more of an anti-Russian more than anti-Jew.
Correct. They wanted to ethnically cleanse that part
Oh
of the
my
country.
God.
Excuse me. I
Sorry.
meant-
No, you can say it.
I can't. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I understand it. I understand the Ukrainian point of view too. I mean, they suffered tremendously through Holodomor and then occupations by both the Soviet Union and the Nazis. And they saw a lot of their wealth transferred to ethnic Russians. They saw a lot of corruption and during the whole Soviet era. And so
That's crazy chat.
legitimately have, beef. The problems with that thinking, obviously, though,
Anything
is
else?
Russia also suffered under communism, and Russian people also starved, just like Holodomor, from the same leadership. You don't blame the ethnicity for what a government did. But
Well, when we say Russians also starved, things like the Holodomor caused very specific damages to like Ukraine and Kazakhstan. Like even today, when we talk about Eastern Ukraine is full of ethnic Russians and Crimea is full of ethnic Russians, that's specifically because crops were requisitioned from starving Ukrainians that were like defending their families from cannibals who were being shot in the back as they tried to flee their villages. And then once, what was it? Is it 3 to 5 million? I think Ukrainians died in the Holodomor, maybe more.
No, like 11.
There might have been 11 million. Then afterwards you have, and then Kazakhstan too, not even doing that. Then you're bringing in a bunch of ethnic Russians afterwards to Russify the country, to use that excuse, later on and say, well, there's a lot of ethnic Russians there, therefore we ought to respect that there are ethnic Russians there. Yeah, I don't think.
Do you guys understand what he's talking about? Joseph Stalin like starves out a bunch. The reason why there's so many ethnic Russians, Russian speaking. You understand? Ukrainians don't speak Russian. There's 2 different languages there. Some of them speak both. But what he's talking about before was during Stalin, they needed to take the crops from Eastern Ukraine and then use that to feed their own army.
Troops.
Yeah. And then when those people tried to escape, then they just shot them in the back. And then what happened was Russia started filling that area, and they both agree on this. They started filling that area with Russian speaking people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not their fault. The people that are there now that are Russian, it's not their fault. But just like I would say before,
a lot of Russians in Russia also starved. Also had
for sure. We can agree Stalin was a piece of shit. How about that? But my point is, when we go back, you said something before about the nuclear weapons, giving up the nuclear weapons.
Oh my God.
First off, it's not Ukraine's fault that they had nukes. That was the Soviet Union who gave it to them. And number 2, when they agreed to get rid of their nukes, it was the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia who all agreed to accept the boundaries of Ukraine. And so
they were supposed to get security promises. If they're going to get rid of the nukes that they can't afford to maintain, then that's going to come with certain.
That's crazy.
Let's go back to the can't afford to maintain thing, because when we get to the World War III thing, we're going to discuss that. Okay.
Well, also, I think you guys should resort, because that is important.
Anything else?
In 94,
this is
that
what they
Budapest
say.
memorandum guaranteed them. You said security assurances that we're not going to fuck with you, but could you please give your weapons essentially back to Russia?
And they did. And you were saying like blackmail, but one more thing. Well, the point I'm trying to make is they didn't make the nukes. Russia gave Ukraine the nukes during the world. When the fall, you have the invasion of Afghanistan, then you have Chernobyl, and you have it becomes incredibly expensive. Then you have perestroika. The whole country falls apart. They start giving off the satellite countries, and they don't get back the nukes. So Ukraine has those nukes, but they didn't abscond with them. They didn't steal them. So the fact that they give them up, it's not like they're not blackmailing.
Nobody's claiming they built their own nukes or something.
Right. But my point is, it's not their fault. It's like, for instance, I'll also make the argument it's not anyone's fault that Ukraine has the 20th largest oil supply in the world, and that's the reason why Russia is actually invading. I don't think they're doing it to protect the people of Donbass at all. I don't think so. I think their country is 35% of their GDP is petroleum. It's shrunk down to 18% of their GDP is petroleum. Over half of their government revenue comes from taxes on petroleum, and this is severely hurting them. So you have a country that's in between you and Germany, and that country is going to sell their own petroleum to Germany.
No way.
That's part of the reason why they invaded. And the other reason why I think they invaded when they did is the 200 F-35 Lightnings that are going to be shipped to NATO countries. You're going to have countries like Finland that has air supremacy over Russia now, because Russia doesn't have anything in the arsenal that can stand up to an F-35. That's why I think Russia did
can carry nukes as well.
Yeah, well, so pretty much a B-52 can carry nukes. So this is kind of a misnomer. A B-1 can carry nukes. An F-117 can carry nukes. A B-2 can carry nukes. An F-16 can carry nukes. An F-15 can carry nukes. An F-18 can carry nukes. The thing is, it's the A modification.
Mm-hmm.
They can all carry nukes. It just means it's a bomb that has a warhead with uranium, plutonium in it.
So just going back to make sure we hit the overarching thing. Destiny's stance is there was no real reason for Russia to invade. Do you agree with that or disagree with that? He's saying whether it's moral, political.
Well, I mean, there are reasons why.
Yeah, it wasn't justified.
That's crazy.
They want to keep Ukraine in their sphere of influence.
Yeah,
that's the reason.
Would you agree with that?
I agree. They want Ukraine in their sphere of influence.
Anything else?
I think their main reason, though,
and you don't think they were justified?
Look, the Donbass tried to secede, tried to be independent, tried to join Russia. They got rejected.
Mm-hmm.
Then they tried to be independent.
Yeah.
They recognized that independence. was like a week or so after that, it ends up the war or the SMO starts. They call it Special Military Operation. Sends in about 90,000 guys, not enough to take over the country and everything.
Yeah.
I think he was still trying to negotiate with the West by not going in full steam in the beginning. Maybe you can talk about the strategy part, but I'm anti-war. Like, I don't want there to be a war between Ukraine and Russia. But I feel like the Ukraine point of view is on TV. Like, if you want to hear what Ukraine thinks, just turn on the news.
Mhm.
Yeah, but if we wanted the war to be over, we should have just let Ukraine finish recapturing the Donbass. The war is only extended right now because of Russian troops, military training, and arms flowing into the country from the east.
Well, they're not going to let them retake or
Their own
conquer
country?
the Donbass because Russia then has to deal with NATO-trained standard troops on their border.
What if,
Which
wait,
they-
wait, wait,
they-
what
they
about,
already see that
what
on
about
our border.
Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania?
Yeah, what
They're
about
already there.
Finland
No
already has
way.
NATO trained troops. on the
Finland
border.
is there too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the problem with, again, I'm going to say this
All
again.
Russia has done is expanded the amount of NATO countries on their borders now as a result of the
Hold on,
conflict
did
in
Ryan get to
Ukraine.
finish his
Go
point? You're saying, you were saying that they'd have NATO trained troops.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Estonia is not Ukraine. This is Ukraine's a much more powerful state, larger population, larger military presence, and they would love to not have that situation with Estonia, Finland either. But Putin drew a line. He said,
Oh my
we're not
God.
going to expand in Ukraine. And
But that-
they have a lot of, like you guys were saying, there's a lot of resources there that are in play. And they didn't have the Nord Stream lines yet, and those got blown up.
Mhm.
But they had to transit through Ukraine. They were going to circumvent them and go directly to Germany.
Sure.
But they also knew how easily you can reverse that by blowing up
You-
the line,
Well, but there's also the problem is that
which they said they did themselves. at
crazy,
first.
chat.
so
Wait, who said they did it?
they're saying Ukraine said they did. Ukraine
Ukraine did not
militias.
take credit for those
No,
attacks.
Ukraine didn't say that.
Gotcha.
Just
Anything
Western
else?
media tried to act like Russia blew up its own pipeline.
Oh, got it. So Russia didn't actually say they blew
No,
up
the
their own
official
pipeline.
story now is Ukraine blew up the pipipeline.
There is no official
Yeah, I don't
story.
think there's an official
Yeah.
story. There's one official story that
No.
Sweden or Norway had something to do with blowing it up.
Yeah, Cy Hirsch had his. He had his. Well, he supposedly documented. It was in a Substack article. He thought that it was the U.S. blew up the line using allies.
Yeah, but Hirsch's story is total conjecture. He provides no compelling evidence, no proof in that
And the
entire.
U.S.'s story is no, he didn't do it. Ukraine did
Ha
it.
ha ha ha.
The U.S. does not say Ukraine did it. I think right now the position is, if you look at all the evidence, it looks like it was probably Ukraine. I think that's a fair assumption to make. I think the most credible story I've seen so far is that the Ukrainian military, without Zelensky's knowledge, might have sent forces to that area and destroyed those pipelines. But I've also heard, I believe that Norway said they've witnessed like Russian
Yes.
ships, like 3 Russian ships that were in areas they weren't supposed to be that could have been equipped for diving operations. So it looks like Ukraine might have done it, but there is no official story. I don't think anybody knows right now
So
for
Do you have
sure.
anything back for that, Ryan? Or
I don't know what about the Russian ships. So it's not. There's
No
no,
way.
reason for Russia to blow up its
Wow.
own pipeline when they can just turn off the gas and
Sure.
leave the infrastructure.
Just so we're clear, there was no gas actually running through the pipeline at that point. There was gas in the pipeline because you can't keep it in a vacuum. But
Yeah,
there
they
was.
had.
yeah.
They had 2 lines, but it was on the verge of opening.
So let just to go back to what I was saying before, one of the reasons why the Middle East became so wealthy the way that it did is because it's easier to dig for oil in sand countries. That's also the reason why we dig for oil in West Texas and places like that.
Okay.
That's why you don't dig for oil
Oh
in
my
places
God.
like Colorado. It's harder to get through that type of environment because of new technologies as far as extracting oil. There's all of a sudden all this oil that's in Ukraine that's available now that wasn't really available 30 years ago. That's a part of this that's kind of being missed. And a lot of it's around Crimea. So what's happened is Ukraine was threatening also to allow Western
You-
countries to come in and get some of that oil. It's not just the fact that
That's crazy,
Russia
chat.
can't go through Ukraine with their pipelines to sell their oil. It's that Ukraine will then sell its own oil.
Gotcha.
Does that make
Anything
sense?
else?
You have a country, a petrostate, which is basically what Russia is. 33% or 35 to 30% of their GDP came from petroleum. And now you have a neighbor that's in between you and your number one buyer of oil, which is Germany. And he's saying, hey, not only are we going to make it harder for you to sell your oil through our country, we're going to sell our own oil. That to me was a pretense for them to invade. To me, that was the number one pretense for them to invade.
Okay.
Not because they're worried about ethnic Russians in the eastern part. No offense
Well,
to
they have a
Vladimir
naval
Putin.
base in Crimea. They can't lose either.
They already
No,
had
yeah.
that was already an autonomous region. They already had agreements to have
Ha,
Sevastopol,
ha,
that
ha,
naval
ha.
base there. There were no problems with that. Most of the people in Crimea, one of the reasons why the invasion probably worked is most of the people there were friendly towards the Russian Navy. They had no problem with the ships there. They were in and out all the time. That port was used pretty commonly, but it's not like that port was ever under threat.
okay, agreement with that, or
Yeah, I was saying that's just another reason. In addition, I don't know to what degree Ukrainian oil going on in the market is worth a war. It's going to cost a lot more.
But the problem is, it's a bunch of things, right? Is it worth a war if that's all you sell? Do you see what I'm saying? Is it worth a war if they take away Germany, which is buying 30% of its petroleum from Russia? And is it worth a war if they can just bomb the Nord Stream pipeline? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like now your security, your ability to sell petroleum is now put direly at risk. And while the United States, we use a lot of petroleum, our economy is not 30 or even 20% based on
just
energy.
Going to sanction them from selling oil to all those places for going to war anyway.
But here's the problem. That is exactly my next point, which is even if they win, because my point was about the strategery, even if they win, they lose. That was my issue with this whole thing. Because in the end, you had President Putin, he goes off and he lies to the entire world and says he's not going to invade. And then he invades. And while, again, great statecraft, incredible military strategy, absolutely terrible when it comes to diplomacy, you're going to have to pay for that in the end. When you tell the world that you have hypersonic missiles and then you have the Ukrainians shoot down those hypersonic missiles, turns out they're not hypersonic missiles at all. When you tell the world that you have Sukhoi 57s that are supposedly better than F-22s and F-35s,
Anything else?
it turns out you don't even use them in battle. When you tell the world that you have these incredible S-14 tanks that are supposed to be able to knock out anything, and they're just getting blown up on the side of the road. Russia has lost 1,500 tanks in this war already. That's incredible. Just for size and ratio, the United States lost 80 M1 Abrams tanks during all of their invasion of Iraq the entire time, and 63 of them they put back in service. What's happened with Russia is, I don't want to get too far into this, but there's this huge design defect with the tanks where they put the shells right next to the turret, and when you hit it with a javelin, then all of a sudden it blows up the entire tank, and you can see photographs all over the place. Look it up yourself with tanks with the turrets like knocked off. And this is another problem. So now Russia, their second biggest export, which is military defense, nobody wants to buy their Sukhoi 27s because they don't work. Nobody wants to buy their tanks because they don't work. They don't want to buy the T-52s, the T-72s, the T-90s, the T-80s. Nobody wants to buy these tanks. So Russia has triple fucked themselves. They're going to have sanctions with them as far as they're selling petroleum. They're going to have sanctions with them as far as their trade agreements. They're going to have a bunch of companies that are like, we don't want your armament anymore. It clearly put into use against American armament. You guys could not stand up to them. And then finally,
do you think tanks have done well on either side?
I think tanks are going to do really well when those 31 M1 Abrams show up in Ukraine in a couple months. I think tanks are going to do really well. A T-72 cannot do anything to an M1 Abrams. It cannot, and that's going to be a serious problem for Russia.
I don't think it's a tank on tank issue though. It's
a javelin on tank,
landmines and helicopters and things that,
yeah, but
I don't think the Leopard 248 is a bad tank. I just think any tank that walked into a field of landmines that's getting targeted by drones and Hornet missiles and helicopters and anti-tank personnel is going to get destroyed. We're not having giant tank versus tank battles. It's not World War II.
We had one. We did have one in, I forgot what the city was, but there was a massive one in the entire Russian tank brigade.
Was lost. Volgograd, but they lost the tanks to Ukrainian landmines and things.
But my point is this: like, one of the issues that Ukraine, and by the way, it was
anything else?
Prigozhin, how you say his name? He was the one who actually said this. But this is before the coup, the attempted coup, whatever it was. He actually was talking about how the Ukrainian military, which by the way has been trained in large part by the United States. I wouldn't even possibly deny that. And by the way, Ukrainian fighter pilots right now, while we're speaking, are training at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, to fly those jets, those F-16 squadrons that they're about to get. My point with that is that, like, he actually said Ukrainians use doctrine of mechanized infantry along with tanks, along with aircraft. They're using them together. The Russians don't do that. The Russians will just run a bunch of tanks into a certain place, or they'll just use artillery, or they'll just use air power, and they don't have the ability to coordinate. That was Prigozhin who said this. And so my point is, this whole thing is like, even though you have a country that is 4 times bigger than the other country, this should be a first round knockout. This should have ended in the first week. The fact that we're at a year and 5 months, I think this is a really, really bad experience for Russia, and I don't see any way for them out of this without.
So you think Ukraine is winning the conflict?
It's like this: if I'm the underdog and we're tied, I'm winning the conflict. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No way.
But you think it's tied?
Wow. Well, no, but the thing is, right now, well, just so you know, when you have an invading force going up against a defending force throughout history, the invading force loses more people. They just do, because it's just harder. Their supply lines are further. Also, if you have an invading force, let's just say for every person that's fighting, you need 3 behind them in support. So that we're talking about medical, we're talking about logistics, we're talking about fuel, we're talking about food. For the invading force, you need about 7 or 8.
Okay.
That's a really reductive way to look at it.
Okay.
But you
Oh my
need
God.
more than twice as many people to invade as you do to defend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of
right.
course.
So the problem is with the attrition situation, you have one country that has it. You notice how Ukraine is not trying to defend the whole country. They're trying to defend Kiev more than any other part.
Yeah.
And so when that happens, you have an unlimited budget. We can all agree to that, right? Ukraine has more money to spend than Russia.
Yeah.
Or do you guys disagree with that?
They have the
100%.
pockets of
Well,
all
they
of
have
Europe
the
and the
US
US.
as well.
That's
correct.
crazy,
So
chat.
just for people to understand, Ukraine NATO has a $1 trillion defense budget.
Gotcha.
That's including
Anything
the 800
else?
trillion that they get from the United States. And Russia has an $80 billion defense budget. I'm sorry, 1 trillion versus 80 billion.
Yeah.
So it's about 12 or 13 times as much. Ukraine has a blank check. The United States is giving them javelins. If you think this is wrong, if you think this is morally wrong, I'm not here to have that argument. My point is, if the United States is giving them top tier anti-tank weapons, 2 squadrons of F-16s, and their first battalion of M1 Abrams tanks that Russia has no chance against, God forbid if they bring F-35s into this, I just don't see how Russia can win. That's my point.
I disagree with that. all
Ha
of
ha
it.
ha ha.
I don't. I'm not big on the U.S.'s wonder weapons. They thought that would be the HIMARS. They thought it would be the Javelins. They thought it would be the Leopards, and they're all just getting destroyed. I think the war of attrition, like I do agree, they're not going to run out of money because they have NATO money.
Yeah.
So they're not going to run out of money. It's going to be hard to make them run out of toys. They might run out of ammo temporarily, but they're not going to run out of stuff because NATO will keep giving them things.
Agree.
They will run out of personnel.
Possibly, but I think they have better
the
trained
attrition
personnel.
war. I think they were trying to set up a porcupine, and they thought that the
No way.
sanctions were going to be. Even Russia
Wow.
thought this too. That the sanctions were going to be way more devastating than they were. They were pretty much ineffectual, and they thought if we can bleed them with sanctions and force them to charge into well-fortified, bunkered, entrenched positions, it would be Pyrrhic victories at best. And Ukraine has been extremely tough, extremely resilient. And in the beginning of the war, they did have very, crack defense. And
Oh my
they
God.
kind of pussyfooted their way in with 90,000 troops. But Russia was looking at it, holding back because they also didn't know whether or not they could deal with the sanctions. Without the clock on their side, because they're not in a hurry, they don't have to, they're not bleeding from sanctions. They decided to go with the meat grinder approach instead of the blitzkrieg approach. They're going to sit back.
That's crazy,
with
chat.
artillery, the very slow, methodical way.
That is what Russians are good at.
Where you can destroy them at range.
Gotcha.
You don't
Anything
lose a lot of
else?
personnel because you're hitting them from further away than they can hit you. It's a very slow way to do it, but they've got all the time because the sanctions are hurting NATO more than they're hurting Russia. And Ukraine is
agree with
running
that?
out of personnel.
Because I
The
disagree.
sanctions are hurting NATO more.
Yeah, because the reason why I disagree is because we've already had China denounce what's going on in Ukraine. So that to me, China is going to be.
Yeah, and I think Russia's done some funny things, I think, with their currency and everything, with disallowing people to sell Russian currency. And they're doing ways to try to artificially inflate like the economy they have. But I'm pretty sure most experts agree there's been like a pretty big contraction of the Russian
It's
economy.
been 3% a quarter for Russia's GDP over the last couple of years.
Well, it's already a country that's got pretty poor, I think, in terms of GDP per capita. Like Russia is not the richest country in the world.
Russia is about as wealthy as Mexico, and a lot of people don't realize that. Russia is right on point. Russia has a smaller GDP than Italy.
I don't think you can judge the real economy just by GDP numbers.
But what I think is you can judge how well you can replace tanks and replace aircraft and replace anti-tank weapons with economy. And then once your biggest secondary supplier,
they're out of 155 millimeter ammo, even like NATO.
No way.
Supply. That's why they went to
Wow.
cluster ammunitions. They don't have enough artillery shells to shoot. And Russia's able to do that around the clock. And they're not running out of supplies. They've been preparing for this for a while.
I'm pretty sure, haven't we used like 2 million of the 20 million artillery shells we have in stock? I'm pretty sure we just haven't shipped the rest yet. And then even if we do exhaust our supply, can Russia, the country, out-manufacture the rest of the Western world when it comes to artillery shells?
Yes, they are.
I don't
Oh
think
my
they can.
God.
And anti-air defense too. And like the F-16s, Syria shot down the F-16 by very well-trained pilots from the Israelis.
For sure.
With an S-200.
Yeah.
Now you have less trained Ukrainian pilots versus well-trained Russians with S-400s and
S-400.
above.
So
I don't think they're going to be a game changer either.
So
They're going to get shot
you-
down.
Yeah. So the difference with the Israeli thing is the United States is going to supply those F-16s
That's
with
crazy,
anti-radiation
chat.
missiles that can fire at more than 60 miles. I think the S-400 is in deep shit, and they don't have any S-400s in
Gotcha.
country. They can't bring
Anything
them
else?
in country because one of the problems is when you turn. That's what happened. By the way, I don't know if you know this. A lot of those anti-aircraft machinery didn't work. They never turned them on, and that's why they weren't able to defend that part of the country, because they weren't even turned on. Because one of the things that happens is if the United States is involved, or if U.S. Firepower is involved, this is one thing we learned. This is what a F-16 Wild Weasel does. Is when
Real quick, because we got to keep it focused because we're going into this whole
Sorry.
tangent here. He's basically saying that the sanctions are hurting NATO more than Russia, and you guys are saying you think the sanctions are hurting Russia more.
I definitely think it's hurting Russia more.
Ryan, what's your basis for saying that you think the
Ha, ha, ha,
sanctions
ha.
are hurting NATO more
There's
than
the cost
Russia?
of living going up in Europe. It's a matter. They need the oil. They need the gas. The
Gotcha.
sanctions are hurting them. And I agree with Andre Martinyanov about GDP. Like, there's a lot of ways to finesse that stuff. Like, Russia and Mexico are not on the same level of living standards.
Okay.
Agreed. No, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. And then what about you guys? What makes you think that Russia is suffering more from the NATO? From the sanctions than NATO is?
I mean, we're having energy issues all over the world. I don't know if it's just the sanctions on Russia that are dealing with that. My understanding is the cost of energy has come down pretty significantly in Europe in some ways too. Like, I think natural gas is about where it was prior to the conflict.
No
I think.
way.
Okay.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure Russia can to say that like GDP means nothing. Maybe to Russia it doesn't,
It
because
didn't say
who knows?
nothing, just that I don't think quoting GDP, I mean, like, that's the economy. There's a lot of other factors to
Well,
judge the economy.
But it's also the wealth that the government has with which to fight a war. Their war chest is a taxation of GDP. That's why I bring that number up.
It depends. Like, also, I don't think, like, we have an enormous military expenditure, more than like the next
Oh my
40
God.
countries
Correct.
combined
So
or something.
just so you know, it's
But look
800
how-
for us, and then 290 for the next is China. Then after
Right.
that is Russia at 80.
But how cost effective is a lot of our military gear? Like, a lot of
I
these
think it's pretty
Lockheed
cost
Martin products. I mean, you're talking about a $500 million F-22 Raptor
It's
with Sidewinder missiles.
yeah, it's a great
Should it
You
be that price tag?
Sure. It's a really great question. And so part of the
That's
reason
crazy,
why
chat.
we've been able to take away some of that cost is because we sold 200 F-35s to NATO.
Gotcha.
And so
Anything
the
Yeah, I was going to
cost-
say, when we say, is it worth that price? The rest of the world seems to think so, because everybody
buying
wants to
them.
buy our F-35s. It's a very highly in-demand plane. So it seems to be that everybody else in the world agrees that that's an incredibly cost-effective weapons platform.
Yeah.
Maybe some people don't. Maybe Russia says it's not. But Russia, again, they also said they have hypersonic missiles, which are being intercepted by Patriot missile systems. So apparently that's not
They
the case
blew up
either.
the Patriot system in Kiev.
So here's the
They
thing.
might have blown up one of them when they launched with the 6 missiles at once, I guess.
So
But
such
There's
a-
only
such a-
3.
Such a great point. So here's what
those
happened.
missiles shouldn't ever be intercepted, though, by if it's a true hypersonic missile, which
Exactly.
it's not, right?
So let's talk about this. For those of you who understand, Patriot missile battery, it just fires
Ha, 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 ha.
anti-air. It takes on missiles from the opposing side, but it's ballistic, it's kinetic, it doesn't have a warhead in it. It just goes through it. In this case, what you're talking about, the Russians said they damaged one of the Patriot missile batteries.
I think Ukraine said they had it online that
Yeah,
day.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the Americans and the U.S., the Western media agreed that that's what happened. That's why I actually trust what I'm hearing more from them than what I hear from Russia, because what I hear from Russia is that they have hypersonic missiles, and then when they don't work, they arrest 3 of their missile scientists the next day for treason. So to me, this just feels
No
like,
way.
from a military standpoint, if you want to make a
Wow.
moral standpoint, I can understand, but from a military standpoint, this just feels like one cataclysmic failure after another.
I think that's
And even
Western-
I'll even critique Mike, because you kept saying it was maybe bad statesmanship to say that they weren't going to invade and then invaded. I think the initial plan was there was never going to be an invasion. It was going to be the special military operation into Kiev.
Sure.
Then they were going to have Belarus 2.0, and then they could have said we never invaded.
So-
It was just a
so-
thing,
so
but that
you-
failed miserably.
You believe that?
Oh my God.
You believe that Putin believed that he was going to be welcomed coming into Ukraine?
I from what I've read, I guess you're the military analyst guy.
Yeah.
From other military analysts, is the readiness
I've
of
heard
the
that.
Russian military was just not where anybody in Russia thought it would be.
And
That they were undersupplied, they were understaffed, the supplies they
Cool.
did have weren't maintained, and that what you had was a bunch of unaccompanied armor,
That's crazy, chat.
uncoordinated troops that were
Yes.
launching horribly coordinated attacks, which they've gotten their shit together a lot better now, a
Yes.
war into the conflict.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
so
Anything
there's an
else?
FSB report that was released that showed that they didn't know there was going to be an invasion. So that goes to your point. I've heard the same thing that you're saying. The other problem
I
is
predicted the invasion. Got it right.
good. You were smarter
But
than
even when a lot of people like they're not going to do that, yes, they are. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been preparing for this for a long time.
All right.
Didn't-
So real
Didn't Trump
quick.
also as well predicted too?
Hmm?
Trump? The invasion?
I don't know. Did he?
Oh.
So
pretty
I think we
low.
got some rants. Chris, should we look at them now or no? Or wait? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll read the rants, and then I think we're good here with, unless you guys have any other disagreements on. It seems like you guys agree on
can
a
we do
decent amount
this?
on this Russia-Ukraine thing. But
Can we do this? Can we all three have predictions? Actually, all five of us. Can we do predictions?
what you think's going to happen?
Yeah, I think because in
Yeah,
a
we could
debate
do
like
that.
this is different from the other ones. In this, there is a unique chance for us to be extremely right. So, what do you have?
Okay.
You have a prediction? Well,
Yeah, I do actually. I think personally speaking, Russia did what they had to do by going into Ukraine.
I agree with that.
However, at the same time, like what they did is they caused an issue because now NATO's going to be all on their necks.
Mhm.
So eventually they either got to surrender or become part of NATO. And at that point, they're not going to surrender. So
And they've been offered to join NATO before.
No
I think
way.
during the Yeltsin
Declined.
administration, they
Yeah.
did, and
Wow.
they declined.
they don't want to. So I think at this point where it's going, if they don't win, they're going to have to surrender.
What do you think, Stephen?
I don't see Russia making any more significant gains in territory. Dawson is right in that the grind on the Ukrainian side is a grind right now.
For sure, they have
It's-
fewer people.
Yeah, and that the it's a war measured in meters and not miles in terms of captured ground. Again, from the military analysis I've seen, it seems like
Oh my
whether or
God.
not Ukraine can retake significant territory is going to come down to whether or not they have the personnel and they've got the supplies and they have the micromanagement. But right now, they have a really hard time macro managing all of their different forces together. That the Ukrainians don't have that wide scale discipline and training yet to be able to deploy all of these different weapon systems
You
and then make them work in a unified combat sense. Assuming
That's
that
crazy,
they
chat.
continue to improve there, they have an unlimited purse from the West. They probably have an unlimited desire in their citizens because I think Ukrainians
Gotcha.
want to fight
Anything
to defend
else?
Ukraine probably more than Russians want to fight to do whatever they're doing in
Yes.
Ukraine. So I think that I feel like in a year from now, we'll have a pretty clear picture of what the time horizon is on Ukraine's victory. And I think a victory for Ukraine at the least includes recapturing the Donbass. I don't know about Crimea. I have a hard time believing they'll get that back, but who knows?
Myron, what do you think? Who do you think? What do you predict? A year, 5 years?
I think Russia's going to hold what they got, and pretty much the Ukraine's going to be cut in half.
Oh, well, not in half. I mean, you can.
I mean, yeah,
Chris, if you can show the-
roughly like
it's like 15%.
The entire eastern part of Ukraine
Ha,
will
ha,
belong
ha.
to
Chris,
Russia,
if you
pretty
can
much
show that
is what I
map,
think.
so that people could have an understanding.
I think they're
Oh, you have a
decisively winning
graphic?
the war slowly but surely, and I think that at this point, Ukraine isn't going to be able to regain the lost ground, from the east.
Just so you guys see, that is before the war, and then there's the initial invasion. You see all the Sumy and Kharkiv have been taken by the Russians, and then this is the counteroffensive down there in the bottom left. So Kharkiv and Kherson have been taken back by Ukraine, and then this is where we are currently, right there with Bakhmut being taken by the Russians, and Mariupol is like far. A lot of people talk about the Mariupol.
No
thing.
way.
Mariupol is far inside of
Wow.
Russian territory, or Russian taken territory.
I don't
think
think
that's a little city
Kharkiv
in
was
between.
taken. It was surrounded. Sumy was taken. Kharkiv was never in Russian.
There was
Was it?
a commander in the Russian forces who put out an evacuation order. That's all I know. So again, we have the fog of war, but I've read a report that it was actually
And then
taken.
you guys
by
give your
the-
predictions that we're going to switch over to 9/11.
what is your prediction?
Oh, I think they'll hold the Donbass.
Oh my
They'll
God.
take Lyman. They may push up to the Dnieper. They're not interested in Western Ukraine. And Ukraine's going to run out of personnel. I don't think the F-16 is going to be a game changer. I don't think the Ukrainian counteroffensive or offensive has been successful at all. They're getting wiped out. They could sharpen their discipline and be better at hybrid warfare, but Russian artillery
That's crazy,
has
chat.
proven to be the king of the battlefield, and Ukraine doesn't have an answer for it.
Yeah, I think
Gotcha.
Russia. I think
Anything
Ukraine
else?
is going to have an answer for artillery. I think they're going to have just as many pieces as the Russians are. My whole issue is this. I think the only way this ends is at some point Putin is no longer the president of Russia. If that doesn't happen, then there's always going to be some level of conflict at this area.
If he was taken out, it would change everything.
There you go. So
that's
and
really-
I think there's a high probability that they do things. They have what's called a Russian election where they push you out of a 4th-floor window. I think and I'm not hoping death on anybody, but if he leaves the country, if he goes somewhere else, I think what happens is the cost of this war and the unpopularity of it in Russia, immediately whoever the new leader is starts to secede certain areas of Donbass. Crimea, you're right, that has way more to do with their hold over the Black Sea, but I also disagree with the two of you. I 100% that believe they intend on trying to take Western Ukraine. I think that they want to have a revolution in what's the other country? Moldova. And in order to do that, they're going to have to connect those two pieces. So they're going to have to,
Moldova.
The Transnistria, I mean.
yeah, Transnistria, right?
Oh.
Yeah. So I think they're going to try to start something there, and in order for them to do that, they're going to have to push further west. And I think one of the problems is because of the way,
No way.
Putin gained power,
Wow.
and because of the popularity of his annexation of Crimea, the unpopularity of this combined with any kind of loss is. In Russia, they don't have like peaceful transfers of power. I mean, I know between Yeltsin and Putin and they did, but I think he's in a way fighting for his life. And so because of that, I think they can't quit. They can't stop fighting, no matter to the point where it gets irrational. I think they can't. And the other problem, what I said before, is while you're saying that they
Oh
have
my
a
God.
personnel problem in Ukraine, on the Russian side, they have a materiel problem because China is no longer going to supply them with stuff. Now, they can still get artillery shells from Iran. I think South Africa, there's a couple other countries that can give them the artillery shells. But the problem is, like I said before, this is going to be a serious, serious problem. And I think the ultimate ending of this thing is going to be the end of the Putin administration.
See you next time.
That's crazy,
Bucko.
chat.